Whoa, I think I'm recording. Yeah, we are. Nice day, actually. Still got some snow, but it feels kind of nice out anyway. I'm still barely functional. Anyway, words. Yeah, so I'm thinking about these different conversations with people, and words get in the way. I mean, words are just so flawed. If you don't have good, solid definitions of what a word means. So, I'm thinking of doing another Drake equation video, and I think I should just say in 6 minutes I already finished that subject, but just thinking about the concept of probability and how people don't really understand what probability is. They have a word for this idea that there's some sort of odds involved. That there's some sort of when you randomize by creating circumstances previous to an event or that are part of the event, and that somehow that will create this, like you flip a coin and there's a 50-50 chance of its outcome. There really isn't. With each flip, there will be an inevitable outcome. But you're just assessing these unknown variables, these variables that you can't perceive. And if these variables are a big enough number, they wipe out the inevitability as we can perceive it. And it becomes virtually random. But it isn't really random. Anyway, I didn't want to get lost in that. But it's like Pierrot's been using words like life and consciousness and awareness. He doesn't want to touch the words that are those things are made out of, and that's the part that's annoying. I would argue that life, by definition, is self-replicating. That is, it doesn't invade something else to replicate. It doesn't do all this other stuff. It collects parts and it makes a copy of itself. If something does that, it deserves the title of life form. Even if we made one synthetically, made a little machine that was capable of letting it go in the world all by itself, it would collect the necessary parts and build a copy of itself. It deserves the title of a life form. It won't be a DNA base, maybe. It might not be the type of life form that we are. Yeah, and it can't be made out of a life form, obviously. That would be cheating. You couldn't put some sort of microorganism inside the box and then have the box sit outside and replicate. Well, you could, but I'm just saying that's cheating. So anyway, I'm just saying there's a perfectly adequate definition of what life is. And then you move to the second qualification of what a life form, what kind of manifestations it can be in. And we have a word for that. We call it sentient. Being able to feel, to sense the world. Having senses. We have these 5. I would say we have 6 because our brain creates an emotional awareness, an awareness of emotions. It creates and generates. It has awareness of visions of the future, imagination. It has visions of the past. No matter how imperfect they are, they're visions, memories, and so it's like a sixth sense. But anyway, it's a sensing, and the key word would probably be feeling thing, sentient life form. And that's what the category we're talking about. Consciousness is just another way of describing sentient, feeling life forms. Awareness is a looser word that probably doesn't have much value in being used and then the explicit sense, would metaphor it to, or analogize it to, the words spontaneous versus random versus inevitable. Spontaneous would be the word of the most poor use. That's a practical matter. There's no time where you should be desperate enough to use that word. It's just so foul. And awareness is one of these words where it should only be used in the very narrow context of, were you knowledgeable of? That kind of awareness makes sense. Did you know that this Monday is a holiday? That kind of thing. That's the only legitimate use, is in acknowledging, acknowledging that there's a faculty we have of awareness, of knowledge of knowing, and in that context the word has use. But this idea of awareness as I'm sensing it is a different kind of use, and it's a misuse, in my opinion. So back to the real gist of the conversation, and this is a repeat offense kind of deal, and it's really starting to put me off in kind of there's no point in having a conversation with people who refuse to use common language and refuse to use it accurately, or in an effort to be accurate, and instead are using it in an effort to be misleading and inspecific and inexplicit, to create the confusion or misunderstanding necessary to perpetuating conversation about nonsense. And I would accuse Sir Perot of that abuse. So we know we can use a word like feeling fairly reliably because we're witnesses to what those are. We have personal knowledge of feeling, and the idea of sensing a qualitative aspect to a sensation, and having a good or bad element to it, or even a weird element. But anyway, we know what a feeling is, basically, and so it's a pretty good word for using, if you're going to use it, to say, what are these other life forms doing? And if you want to have a conversation about whether, and I really don't think anything could possibly think without feeling. I think feelings are, they have to manifest, there has to be a correlation between feeling and thinking, but they're really, it's like you can't, there's no point in feeling if you can't think about what you're feeling. That's true. So, I mean, it just seems logical that there is a tie between these things. They probably got both of them at the same time. What was happening is that the theater itself was built, and it had an opening day. There was a day when the last board was laid, so to speak, by the process of evolution, and all of a sudden, there it was. Boing! There was a sound, and you now feel. And we can go back and look at the organisms, and I think it's just so obvious that it's biologically tied to our neurology, and that it isn't just a manifestation of any kind of complexity. It's a manifestation of a specific kind of complexity. Again, I'd argue that when you consider the size of our brain, it seems quite obvious that it's rather dim and stupid, and that most of its work is in probably manifesting sentience. The stage is what's burning up most of the energy. It's not that the behavior is so fantastically brilliant, especially we're not born with much, that there's a huge knowledge base built into the brain. It's more that it's the advantage of having an immediate consciousness, and a consciousness that can learn as it goes, that is constantly adapting its behavior to the environment and to the circumstances. So I sort of brought that up in one of the last walk and talk videos. Sorry, these are a little bit useless. I have to more focus this argument. But yeah, the point I was making was, that we have this mood that's created, and that gives us all these options in terms of how we interact with the world on a Monday versus a Tuesday versus a Wednesday, how we interact at 10 o'clock in the morning versus 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All of that is what is the extra capacity this brain is built to give us, this big, huge amount of resource. And so it's a little advantage for a pretty substantial amount of hardware. And you're not going to find it in a bacterium. It's just nonsensical. And it's also nonsensical from the point of view that our brain is a huge user of resources. 25% of your energy is being burnt up in your brain, whether you're using it or not, whether you're getting much good out of it or not. And I don't think a bacterium could afford those kinds of inefficiencies in its highly competitive environment. And there'll be no reason for us, being the second evolution, to being the thing that grew out of that, for us to start doing it inefficiently. So if the bacteria has fallen on some way to do thinking and feeling in some hugely efficient manner, there's no reason for it to become hugely inefficient in us, especially when you consider the extent of the behaviors, flight and fight, all these strategies for evasion. If the bacteria has it so, if he's doing all that with brain power, with cognitive awareness, there'd be no reason for us to have this big giant blob in here. We'd only need about 500 or 600 bacterium, to combine their neural networks into one. So we should theoretically be able to do all of our complex behavior with just a little teeny speck of brain. And that doesn't seem to be anywhere near the truth. And it seems that most of the evolutionary pressures would be to keep us lean and mean, not to oblige us to become weak and vulnerable by having to expend a lot of resources in our highly competitive environment. Seems again, once again, the obvious. You can't compare. They are, strictly speaking, there are apples and oranges in the category of life. They are very different things in the same category. We are very different from microorganisms. We aren't sharing a life struggle. They are, in fact, mechanical devices. They are little chemical fancies, if we want to call it, fancy chemicals, a fancy arrangement of chemistry, but they're just machines. They are not experiencing, they are not feeling their way around their world. It's just not a sensical conclusion. It's nonsense. And, there are, I guess I'd still argue, lots of ways to demonstrate that our hardware is specialized to do this. That happened some, 300-400 million years ago, that organisms started doing this neural thing, this neuron thing, and it's a manifestation of having neurons, and arranged neurons that creates consciousness, sensation, the combination of senses into a theater, into a conscious theater. That didn't exist before neurology. Yeah, probably enough. I don't want to re-argue the same argument. It's sort of an irrelevant conversation. It doesn't really matter to me, personally, beyond the fact that I just don't think it's the truth. And I think it clouds the water to speak of parameciums having a welfare state. But it's nothing but more evidence, if it were true, if insects were being physically tortured in their metamorphosis, stuck in a cocoon and having their body parts ripped to pieces and rearranged, and they were actually sentient during that process, it would be good reason to go on a kill the poor suffering beasties mission. Likewise for parameciums and the rest of it. If you're going to say they're having a life and they're feeling their life, then there's all the more reason to put them out of their nature-imposed, horrifically unnecessary suffering. Because obviously they are not doing anything that's necessary. Their existence is not in and of itself useful or productive or sensible or rational. They're being just obliged by a Borg molecule to engage in a game of carnage. They're being it isn't any better than the human centipede of horror, for us to accept sentience in that environment. So it just makes it more clear how urgent the need is to do the right thing and quit playing this horrifically wasteful, insidiously torturous and maniacal in its function game. Pretty much. Well, anyway, I wanted to talk more about words, but so anyway, the point being is that I'm just getting sick of listening to the drivel. So there's going to be a point where I'm just going to have to cut him off and just stop listening to his videos. They're just baby talk. Because he won't use words in any kind of rationally coherent way. We're going to constantly redefine what words mean, and there's no point in having conversation. It's just stupid. Fuck 'em.